I'm asking the question again in this talk, did God create everything? We've looked at how the universe started. I did 2 talks on that. We also looked at where the information contained in DNA comes from. Well, this time what I'm going to look at is the fossil record, and we're not using it to explain how life started, but we're just seeing, does it support the traditional view of evolution? What this slide shows is called Darwin's tree of life, and it's one of the fundamental ideas behind his theory of evolution. It doesn't explain how life started, but it basically says that we started with simple organisms, and over a very long period of time, they've evolved into much more complex organisms. Well, if that's true, what we'd expect the fossil record to show is that the oldest fossils should be fossils of very simple organisms, and the most recent fossils should be fossils of very complex organisms, and there should be this gradual change between very simple organisms and much more complex organisms, as shown in those 2 pictures. The other thing it should show, the fossil record, it should show a vast number of species, not just the species you can see in those diagrams, but it should also show these intermediate or transitional fossils as well. In other words, fossils of species which are in between one species and another species. What does it show? Let's have a look. The fossil record is dominated by something called the Cambrian explosion. What that shows is that for a huge amount of time, there are almost no fossils at all. Certainly no complex ones, and then suddenly, it says they're about 540 million years ago, suddenly lots and lots and lots of very complex species suddenly appear in the fossil record. They've got nothing which build up to them. There's no simpler forms of them gradually changing into these more complex ones. No, these complex ones just suddenly appear with no precursor or no simpler versions of them leading to them. Or in all their complexity, and some of them are very complex, they suddenly appear. And it's interesting to note that almost all living species they suddenly appear in the Cambrian explosion. So that's one thing. That's what the Cambrian explosion shows. That's what the fossil record shows, is that suddenly, in a short period of time, geologically speaking, almost all species, including the very complex ones, they suddenly just appear. The other thing which the fossil record shows is that after the Cambrian explosion, there's almost no change. So instead of, as the theory of evolution would suggest, is instead of these species evolving and changing into new species, then there's almost no change. It's called stasis. They remain virtually the same until the most recent fossils. Well, so what? What does that suggest about evolution? So what does the fossil record show? Well, it shows that Darwin's theory of evolution is not supported by the fossils. And there's a couple of quotes there. Niles Eldredge is a very famous paleontologist. In fact, he was chairman of the National Academy of Sciences in the United States. And you might think, oh, does he believe in God? Is he believe in creation? Absolutely not. He's an atheist. He doesn't believe in creation or God at all. But when he looks at fossils, and he is an expert paleontologist, he says that the fossil record completely refutes, completely disagrees with the theory of evolution. And it says, change in the manner Darwin expected is just not found in the fossil record. So the fossils disagree with evolution. And there's another one there by David Belinsky, another famous paleontologist. Darwin's theory and the fossil record are in conflict. Okay, that's what the paleontologists say. They're the experts in the fossil record. What about the evolutionary biologists? What are they going to do? Because they can see this evidence which contradicts their theory. Well, there's a quote by Richard Dawkins, where he says, we don't need fossils. The case for evolution is watertight without them. So in other words, because the theory that we believe in is so great, even if there's some contradictory evidence, what are we going to do? We're just going to ignore it. Now then, does that sound very scientific? Again, what I'm asking you to do in this talk is think. And the scientists are saying the fossil record disagrees with evolution. And the evolutionary scientists say, well, in that case, let's just ignore it. There's another remarkably honest admission by Niles Eldredge not that long ago. It's a very honest admission. What he said, we paleontologists have said that the history of life supports the story of gradual change, knowing all the while it does not. In other words, he's very honest, and he says, well, actually, we've been lying to people. We've said our theory or our fossils support evolution, but we know deep down, no they don't. At the end of this talk, what conclusions do we come to? Often Christians are criticised for blindly accepting things without thinking. And yet, if we look at the fossil record, we can see that the big problem is not creation. The fossil record actually supports creation, that God made things in a very short period of time and distinct species. But it certainly doesn't support evolution, at least not Darwin's version of evolution. It just doesn't add up. So what do evolutionary scientists do? Well, they're just going to ignore the fossil record because it doesn't agree with their theory. And it feels like they're the ones who are not thinking, are not prepared to start thinking about what the evidence says. The evidence is clear. It supports creation and not evolution. But it did make me wonder, why are people so keen on dismissing creation? Well, there's a couple of verses from Romans there, and I think they sum things up very nicely. It says there, God has given us creation. Why? So that we can find him. And it says at the end of Romans 1 verse 20, that people are without excuse. It's clear that creation is real. Have a look around you can see, how can we explain nature without talking about a creator? People are without excuse. And it also says what lies in their hearts. They really don't want to think about God. They don't want to accept that maybe there is a God and one day they'll have to stand before him. And it says at the end of Romans 1:25, they, people who don't believe, have exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator. What about you? Please have a think about these things. The fossil record doesn't support evolution. Are you just going to blindly carry on accepting evolution as fact when the evidence doesn't support it? Or are you going to start thinking, well, maybe there is a God. Maybe what I see around me is part of his beautiful creation. And at the end of the day, everyone will praise him, whether they believe in him or not.